Hi everybody. I'm only a little mad at Angel this week. Only a little. She seems to think that one science faith around and find out video wasn't enough. But the issue I have isn't that. Sure, Angel's a sweetheart and bakes me cookies, but Demon had her convinced that we needed a sort of, redemption arc from last week where we agreed with Kyle Butt.
The Bible's been accused of being an outdated book of superstition, written by people who didn't understand the scientific workings of the real world.
I don't want to agree with him again. So Kyle seems to want to be a content sponge for us here at the Fluffy Atheist. Let's ring him out again then. But after this, we really need to give him a break.
Of course, sir.
Thank you. Angel agree too?
Yeah, bitch!
Okay, so this time Kyle has
6 scientific facts that validate the Bible.
well, at least it's not 20.
Number 1, blood being the liquid of life.
That's debatable. Plants grow just fine and are alive without blood. I would say that water is more the liquid of life. All life as we know it depends on water. But I am sure that Kyle has more to say on the matter. Maybe he's going somewhere else with all of this.
In the 21st century, we understand how important blood is. We have studied it and seen its capabilities and its importance to life. Up until the 19th century, doctors believed that harmful vapors entered the blood and caused sickness. For this reason, those doctors would literally bleed their patients by putting leeches on them or cutting the veins and arteries in the elbow and getting that blood out. Well, thousands of years before this lethal practice of bloodletting was in vogue, the Bible stated in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." And just a few verses down, it said that an animal's blood sustains its life.
Bloodletting. Funny thing is, they were onto something. Yes, there were airborne parasites and diseases that contaminated the blood, and yes, even then, they understood that too much blood coming out was a bad idea. That's why in ancient times, and even up to the 20th century, bloodletting was a common practice, just with more and more advanced tools. Scarily enough, we still do bloodletting even today. That's what a dialysis machine actually does. It pulls the blood out of a person and removes some parts of it and puts the rest back. But it's still bloodletting. There are other ways we still do bloodletting, but I think that will be the most prominent example. So, what does the Bible actually say in Leviticus, like what Kyle is mentioning? Is it talking about medicine and human life?
No.
Thank you, Demon. For starters, Kyle is using the New King James Bible if you want to follow along. I don't really care for any of the King James Bibles because of the book's corrupted nature, and that follows along here. All of these verses are really saying and talking about is that the animal's life is in its blood. Not that the blood keeps it alive, but that the life of the animal is inside the blood and you shouldn't eat it. Drain the blood instead. So this isn't referring to medical anything. It's talking about a superstition that the animal's life is in its blood and not that the blood was keeping them alive, because back then what they knew was no blood means die. Even doctors back then would have wanted to heal wounds and stop bleeding to prevent the death of a person from prehistoric times to the earliest texts from anywhere. So this isn't anything special at all. It's just a way for God to say not to eat blood. The funny thing is that there are good and healthy recipes for foods made with animal blood, and we use blood meal and bone meal for fertilizers in plants. So the same nutrients that are in blood are then used to grow vegetables. The funny part of all of this is bloodletting was meant to take the disease out of the blood so that the lifeblood could again be healthy.
Scientific fact number 2, sanitation practices.
Oh boy. I think Ray touched on this in his video, but let's see what Kyle has to say on the topic.
Some of the worst plagues in modern times have been caused by improper sanitation practices. In 1846, the city of London had a terrible cholera epidemic. 16,000 people had been killed. Now, as we know in our modern scientific era, raw sewage carries disease and causes all types of medical problems. If the people in London in 1846 had turned their Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 12, they would have read this. Also, you shall have a place outside the camp where you may go out, and you shall have an implement among your equipment. And when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it and turn and cover your refuse. 3,300 years before London's epidemic, the Bible had implemented a plan to stop such epidemics before they started.
Holy shit!
Bad Demon. Bad pun. But Demon has a point. And it is a funny one. So yes, this is what the Bible tells, but it isn't the point of the section of the Bible. And it's nothing to do with the spread of disease as shown in the 3 verses just before his quote and the verse just after his quote. This is a lesson for everyone. Always read the Bible in context, because when a Christian starts quoting, they will intentionally leave things out if it favors them. And in turn, don't quote the Bible out of context to a Christian, because they will stick it right back in your face as well. Verses 9 to 11 talk about throwing up in the middle of the night from illness. Instead of taking time to get healthy, the person is to leave camp just for the day and come back in the evening in less than 24 hours after washing their hands. For some reason, they think sunset is the great resetting because they can come back then. Chances are they will still be sick and this won't prevent anything. Now, the real kicker is verse 14. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 14. For the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you. It's not because God says it's carrying disease. It's because when you are going to war, he doesn't want you to step in your own shit. In all seriousness, he just wants the camp clean because what comes out is impure. The kicker here is, there is nothing in there about washing your hands after taking a shit like there is after you throw up. Because for some reason, I guess it's just okay to shit in your hands and not to puke near them. None of this is about preventing illness, and in towns, you can still shit in your house happily and dump it outside. This practice was only for war camps. Try again, Kyle.
Amazing scientific fact number 3, an understanding of germs.
Why do I have a feeling this is going to be bullshit as well?
In 1847, about 18% of women who went into a modern medical facility to give birth would die. That's 1 out of every 6. When the doctors and medical students implemented hand washing procedures, the death rate plummeted from 18% to about 2%. These doctors in the mid-1800s had made an amazing discovery, or had they? Is it possible that the doctors simply rediscovered something that had already been known? Well, almost 3,500 years before the 1850s, the Bible stated, "He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with the water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean." You'll find that in Numbers chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. You see, the Israelites were instructed to wash their hands in water with germ-killing agent in it 3,500 years before, in modern medical times, we knew that should be done.
More things left out. And this one is a straight up lie on Kyle's part. The very next verse reveals his lie. And you know what? I'll give it to you from his own book, the New King James Version. Numbers 19:13. Whoever touches the body of one who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean, because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. His uncleanliness is still on him. Sprinkled. This had nothing to do with washing at all. This is talking about a holy water cleansing, a ritual to be performed having nothing to even remotely do with germs and bacteria or washing any sort of anything at all. You can even go about your business, eating, drinking, doing whatever around the house after you touch the corpse. This is the spreading of any diseases the person took on them when they touched the corpse. The exact opposite of what Kyle is insinuating. In the end, it's a spiritual cleansing and not a physical cleansing. Bad form, Kyle. Very bad form.
Amazing scientific fact, number 4. Ship engineering.
Fucking hell, this is the Noah's Ark story, isn't it?
Yes!
Why is the Monday show invading the Friday show?
While you don't go to the Bible for blueprints for a huge barge, you don't think. It just so happens that maybe that is where you go. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 15, the Bible says that a man by the name of Noah builds an ark that's 300 cubits long by 50 cubits wide by 30 cubits high. And it just so happens this is a ratio of 30 to 5 to 3, length to breadth to height. Well, for thousands of years, the ark was the largest floating ship on record. In 1844, a man named Isambard K. Brunel built a huge ship called the Great Britain, and he used a similar ratio to that of the ark, 30 to 5 to 3. As it turns out, that 30 to 5 to 3 length to breadth to height ratio is the perfect ratio to build a huge boat that doesn't need to go anywhere very quickly, but needs to stay afloat and carry tons and tons of supplies.
First of all, the ratio isn't perfect per se, but it's a good, fair size for the larger ships. Ships that sailors used back then when the book of Genesis was written. Ships that had been built all over the old civilizations through trial and error. The only issue is those were trading ships that would tend to travel close to shore to avoid the rough water of the open seas. You see, back then, ships had to be made out of wood, and on open seas with waves that can get absolutely massive in a storm, very long ships would end up snapping in pieces under their own weight over a wave. Now, I have seen the cute little models that some people have put together, but the issue with their models is the thickness of the wood in the models they create in the representation of Noah's Ark. They don't scale down that easy, because if you made wood as thin as you would need to simulate the Ark, the thing would take on water in no time. Add to that the amount of weight inside the Ark holding it down, the first really big wave would send the Ark of Noah down into the water. You're talking the lengths of 1.5 football fields. But I'm getting away from a point here. The main point is that in the days of Noah, the human race already knew well how to build a boat with stability. There are plenty of other issues with the Ark that I don't have time to get into right now. Maybe we'll do that for a Young Earth Takedown video at some point.
Number 5, quarantine. You see, in today's world of advanced medicine and understanding of germs, the idea of quarantining sick patients and separating them from those who are well, it's standard practice. But it certainly wasn't in the ancient world, because they didn't understand germs till about 200 years ago, and they didn't see a need to keep sick people separate from people who were not sick.
Stop! Stop there. We already did this in Ray Comfort's video, which you can see here. For now, I will just summarize. Quarantine was a word invented in the 17th century, but the practice dates back to ancient Egypt, with Amenhotep III dating back to 1300 BCE, while the parts of the Bible that write about the practice written 700 to 1000 years later. The Bible here is just following in the footsteps of an established practice and provides no unique knowledge. Kyle has one fact left on his list. So far, nothing has been standing out, but we can give the rest a shot.
Amazing scientific fact number 6. Food regulations.
Okay. This I gotta hear. Food regulations. I swear, this better not be the pork and bacon thing.
In the United States, we have the Food and Drug Administration. It's the FDA. And it's designed to make regulations that keep people from getting sick from foodborne diseases mostly. Knowing that certain kinds of food, such as pork, are more prone to carry disease, the FDA will make a regulation like this. You can go into a restaurant, you can order a beef steak that is rare. But if you go into that restaurant and you order a pork chop, you can't order it rare. Why? Well, because pork, if it's not cooked properly, has a much higher probability of causing some type of disease. But we know that in modern times. But the Bible, especially the Old Testament, written some 3,000 years before modern times, exhibits a knowledge of food-borne diseases that surpasses anything that was around during the time of the writers. For instance, when you look in Leviticus chapter 11, it mentions that pork was not to be eaten. That's a wise regulation, as we have seen. Even the modern FDA puts regulations in along those lines.
Oh, for fuck's sake. I had to keep this short because he went on for almost 3 minutes and brought up bats for rabies and lizards for salmonella. Let's start with the easy ones to talk about. First, no one around that time were eating bats, or at least not many. Second, no one was really eating lizards, but again, not many. However, if that were the reason why were we allowed to eat chicken and pretty much all other animals that could get rabies? Bats weren't the only ones that could get the rabies disease, and many animals that were clean could have salmonella. None of that would be the case. So let's start in the pork thing. Pigs were known to eat just about anything. They were carrion feeders and also ate the waste from us. Pigs were the cleanup crew, and it was thought back then that this would contaminate the meat. But the reasons the Bible gives is because they have a split hoof and didn't chew cud like cattle did back then. Thus, other unclean animals included hares and rabbits. The animal meat is high in protein and low in fat. It is a good source for many things, including B vitamins. As long as you cook it like you would chicken, there is nothing wrong with eating rabbit, just not exclusively as with any meat. But, I mean, really, guys? Really, Kyle? Pork? Get real.
You see, the Bible never gets a single medical fact wrong, and it exhibits a knowledge of scientific facts that is thousands of years ahead of its time.
Except when it tries to say a woman is unclean for 2 weeks after giving birth to a male, when that is not the case, when washing your hands is a ceremonial thing instead of a cleanliness thing. And speaking of cleanliness, the Bible tells you that you're clean at sundown. That has nothing to do with cleanliness in general, and that sprinkling water on your body is supposed to wash away any diseases from a corpse 3 and 7 days after you touch it. The Bible gets more wrong than it innovates when it comes to medical science. But then again, I wouldn't expect it to make any innovations at all. Human understanding was basic back then when it comes to the medical field. The good news is the things it gets right were things that were passed down onto it and thus through it for generations to come. But there isn't any special knowledge bestowed inside, just common knowledge that it ensured would be learned to future generations. We're going to be nice to Kyle, and personally, I want to thank him for being such a good sport after all this. I mean, we've covered him, 3 or 4 times now? I mean, he's a good guy. But that being said, I am Corsi, and this is the Fluffy Atheist. If you like this, hit those like and subscribe buttons. And remember, if you faith around, I will help you find out what your Bible really says.